Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you're allowing your faith to shape your politics or are your politics starting to shape your faith. In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orlin Johnson, and let me introduce you to our roundtable of regularly scheduled panelists. First, we have with us Mr. Andre Wang, who's the General Counsel and also Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the North Pacific Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have Ms. Bettina Krause, who's the editor of Liberty Magazine. We have Dr. Lawrence Brown, a senior pastor at Queensboro Seventh-day Adventist Church and a Parle director for the Northeastern Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. We also have Ms. Melissa Reed, the Washington liaison for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'd like to welcome all of you for being here with us, and let's just jump right into segment one. Segment one is the United States Senate is now moving forward on a Commission on International Religious Freedom. They are now updating this in 2022, and Senator Marco Rubio is the individual who's taking the lead. It appears to be something where the United States wants to make sure that they're looking at these type of activities that are happening on a regular basis from an international perspective. Bettina, could you give us a little bit of color on what this is all about and why it was so important that it actually be reauthorized in 2022?
Yes, absolutely. This is a body that was created back in 1998. It provides independent advice to Congress, to the White House, and to the State Department on international religious freedom issues. Now, theoretically, it is an independent and bipartisan body, and unfortunately, this doesn't prevent some politicians from also trying to play politics with its reauthorization. So it seems like every couple of years, as this body gets set to be reauthorized and refunded, we come to this down to the wire moment of will USIRF be reauthorized? But it does play an essential role, I think, in US foreign policy, especially when it comes to helping us understand what's happening around the world with religious freedom violations.
So, Melissa, it looks like U.S. foreign policy always seems to try to wrap into some degree some type of religious component. And it seems as though that's an important part of what they do. As somebody who's down in Washington on a regular basis, why is that necessary? Why is that so important?
Sure, and you're exactly right, Orlin. So USIRF actually produces an annual document known as the Annual Report on International Religious Freedom, where it highlights religious freedom concerns in particular countries. It actually has a list, a watch list. And this is really helpful to foreign policy professionals or representatives from the United States as they interact with other state actors, and how the United States shapes its foreign policy. We've seen foreign policy representatives mention USIRF's report in interacting with these countries of particular concern. And we've seen the press also make mention and promote this document as well. And so it certainly is a helpful report on several different fronts. And again, we see this back and forth with the reauthorization, but it does always happen. It does always come through. I'm not sure why it's on a 2-year funding cycle. But, as we've spoken in the past, Congress currently does have bipartisan support for international religious freedom concerns. We're thrilled that that's the case. We wish that was the case with domestic religious freedom issues as well, but certainly glad to see that they can come together for protecting religious freedom on an international stage.
You know, Dr. Brown, you're actually in one of the most, I would call, diverse cities in the United States, where my understanding is you have over 100 languages and 100 different religions that are respected there. I found it interesting that they specifically talked about activities in Nigeria, on the continent of Africa, and in Asia. You know, from your standpoint, how important is it for us to understand that just because we may be comfortable with our religious issues here in the United States, that what's going on in somebody else's backyard could be happening in our backyard?
Well, I'm happy to see this process moving forward, because we went through a stretch where, for some strange reason, administration thought that it could ignore what's happening around the rest of the world and, quote unquote, put America first, not realizing that failing to take care of issues around the world not only cedes the moral authority that this country is supposed to be exercising, but it puts us in a situation where things that ultimately impact us here, by ignoring things that are happening over there, it just puts us behind the eight ball. So things like this and other initiatives that make sure we're keeping an eye on what's happening around the world, it puts us where we can have the impact and the influence that we're supposed to have. Because you can't put America first by ignoring the things that America is supposed to be doing as it relates to our sister countries around the world. So I agree. I don't understand why this always is a nail biter. I'm like, folks, come on, just do the right thing. Let's go.
You know, Andre, what's interesting is that, you know, this is a question that a lot of people are saying, what gives the United States the quote unquote moral authority to be making these type of decisions regarding what's going on in the rest of the world? How do you respond to that type of criticism?
Well, you know, there's always this, kind of American exceptionalism. Whether it's expressly proclaimed or just inferred. You know, the world looks to the United States for leadership, and religious freedom and religious matters is one of them. And you know, in an age where almost everything on Capitol Hill falls on a party line vote, it was encouraging and dare I say shocking that that the International Religious Freedom Act sailed unanimously through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But lest we say kumbaya too soon, just this last Monday, when it went through the House did approve appropriations for the U.S. Commission, but by a vote of 402 to 4. The 4 no votes coming from Republicans Gohmert, Taylor, Green, Massey, and Roy. Massey's office was the only one to make a comment about the vote, and I think it encapsulates the sentiment of all of them. It's he voted no because he doesn't want the government to be involved in religion. He would prefer the government leave religion alone. So interesting rationale coming from the 4 dissenters there.
You know, if I could just jump in, Bettina mentioned that this is set up to be an independent body from the government. And I really appreciate that she made that note, because I think a lot of times USCIRF has the ability to highlight countries that perhaps, we as a nation should be maybe not as strategically involved with, or, partnering with, without feeling the pressure of actually, being a part of our federal government. And so I'm very appreciative that it is an independent body. Again, if we see, if you take a look at some of the countries of particular concern, you'll see some of our trading partners on there, right? And again, these are recommendations, but I'm glad to see that independence.
And Orlin, piggybacking on that as well, you made the comment that it's often criticized for being too American. We need to understand that in the legislation, it is tasked with looking at religious freedom violations through the lens of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it very much brings an international definition of religious freedom violations.
So, Bettina, what are some of the pork that some people try to throw in as it relates to this type of legislation?
Well, one of the issues that we faced back in 2019 in reauthorization was Congress wanted to play a more active role in micromanaging the commission. So you had some representatives putting in stipulations as to the travel of the commissioners, of the staff who would be supporting the commissioners, wanting to bring more of a political slant to the work of the commission. Thankfully, so far in all the reauthorization legislation, that has been eliminated before it's been passed, and let's hope that continues.
I'm going to let that be the last word on this, but this is great work that we're doing, and it's a reminder that what's going on in other people's backyard could be happening in yours fairly quickly. Let's go on to segment 2. Segment 2 I find to be a very interesting concept and what I would call a paradigm that's going on in our country. It's called Christian nationalism. It seems to be something where we are talking about a group of individuals who, for all intents and purposes, have turned their religious focus into not necessarily being about their God or their doctrines, but it's more regarding their patriotism or their Americanism. You know, as we see this concept going on, and I'm wondering, is this something that's good? Is it bad? Is it a blessing? Is it a curse? Dr. Brown, could you start us on this conversation regarding Christian nationalism?
Absolutely. It's built on a false narrative. And that false narrative is that when this country first started, a bunch of would-be preachers got together and carved out this nation. And that's not what happened. Yes, many of the founders had a relationship with God, but in sitting down to build this great experiment known as democracy, they understood that it needed to be founded on a broad foundation that did not put us in a situation where, just like you saw a group fleeing from Europe because of religious persecution and coming to this country and becoming religious persecutors themselves, they understood that if this country was going to be truly great, it needed to avoid a paradigm where religion would underwrite every aspect of secular life. And so this idea that we got started as a quote unquote religious country and now we need to get back to a religious country is the false narrative on which they operate. And essentially you have a situation where people are trying to frame this country as a country that needs to be a religious country from top to bottom. The decisions, the policies, the symbols, and the most troubling aspect of Christian nationalism is that if you don't subscribe to their brand, then you are not considered worthy of being in the club. And that's not what made this country great. This country was made great because people from all over the world came, made unique contributions, and turned us into what we are. Christian nationalism, and just because your first name is Christian doesn't make you a Christian. Christian nationalism seeks to make the argument that these, dare I say, white men who need to be in charge are the ones, and if you can subscribe to what we're doing, then you're welcome. If not, oh well, you can sit over there on the sidelines. That's essentially how they want to proceed, and I have a problem with that.
But Andre, they say that this country was built on Christianity. Is that a false narrative, or what is the confusion with that?
No, I mean, so historically, I mean, you can look at it that these that are founding fathers and those that go back to American history have a Christian background, but when you have today mainstream politicians, elected officials like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, at CPAC, the conservative conference, who stood on the stage and said, "I'm a Christian and proudly a Christian nationalist." While the term may seem uncontroversial, what has now happened is that the term Christian nationalism now refers to this ethnocultural nationalist ideology, and so now we have Republicans using this term to court votes, this rhetoric suggests that there's this ongoing religious war, against white Christians and national dominance, and so you have a former president now using this religious war which is now trickling down to local races. We have in my area, we have a school board election that is using the Christian nationalist platform as an election issue. So we are seeing this throughout the electorate from the top down.
But Melissa, what I'm trying to figure out is both sides like to use Christianity to their benefit. If this is one side using a little bit more on that side and the other side wants to deem that we're more religious, I mean, what is really the downside to this?
So to me, Orlin, I see two downsides. And that is, first of all, that the term Christian nationalism, and what it's, as we've established, what it's about is combining, your Christian identity with your national identity. That's inconsistent with the principles of both our nation as a constitutional democracy, and also the Christian faith, where we serve a God who is all about free will. And so it's actually pretty ironic that this term has come to waste and used so incorrectly in both forums.
But Bettina, this group that talks about Christian nationalism, they're also a group that thinks that the idea of the separation of church and state doesn't make any sense and really doesn't exist. It sounds like they combine both concepts in order to get to where they're trying to get to. Am I missing something here?
Oh, I think you're exactly right, Orlin. This is an ideology which would see the Christian faith controlling access to power and privilege. But, the thing to remember here is that this is neither new and it's not just American. I mean, this is an ideology that is having a moment on the international stage now. You think of countries like Hungary, Poland, Sweden, even countries like India and Turkey. These are all places where religion has become fused with national identity to such an extent that it wields tremendous power in the state. And as Melissa said, this is to the detriment both of religious minorities in those places and also of those faiths themselves. I mean, you look back also in American history. I mean, this is not a new concept, as Dr. Brown pointed out. We had back in 2 centuries ago the demonization of Catholics. We call, the papists. And, you can see echoes of that in the demonization of others today who are out of step with the perceived religious majority. So, this is the problem with religious nationalism of any kind. It excludes others. It defines people as other and as unacceptable, as un-American. And that is a corrupted understanding of national identity.
I'm going to have to let that be the last word, but that is truly an issue that we have to keep our eye on. Any type of corruption regarding religion and your nationality is something that has to be on the top burner. Let's go on to our next segment. Segment 3, we'd like to talk a little bit about a special case that had gone through the court system. It's called Bixler versus Superior Court. It's a case in which we start to see some issues regarding a religion called Scientology, working through a process as it relates to arbitration agreements. Andre Wang, could you tell us a little bit about what that case is all about and what makes it so important for us to even be concerned with it?
Yeah, so this is a case out of California in the state court. So this is coming out of their state court of appeals. It's a sex abuse case where the plaintiff's alleged abuse by another Scientology church member, but that the church not only covered up these incidents of abuse, but also intimidated the accusers. So the church wanted to go to binding arbitration, which apparently all members of the Church of Scientology sign arbitration agreements when they become members, which I learned in the case. So ultimately the church, the plaintiffs are saying, this arbitration agreement is too commingled, is too entangled with the denomination. The arbitration agreement required that church representatives play adversarial roles in the presentation of evidence and the adjudication of how the process moves on. And there's even a provision that all arbitrators be in Scientology membership in good standing of the church. So the court ultimately held that when the plaintiffs leave the denomination, as these plaintiffs did, they left. They dropped their membership, I think even joined other denominations. They are no longer bound by the dispute resolution procedures. And so therefore, because it would require to be bound by the arbitration, it would require the plaintiffs to change their religious beliefs.
You know, this seems to be a very strange concept of you've got a religion and you've got to sign certain agreements to be part of it. But is there anything new about the idea of churches covering up certain things and trying to ensure that it doesn't get out in the public? What are your thoughts on that?
So, absolutely, Orland. Many different denominations or faith traditions have religious operation systems. Jewish traditions, Islamic, some Christians as well. And it's very interesting. The thing that was most interesting to me with the Superior Court ruling was that they pointed to the First Amendment rights of the individuals. When you talk about First Amendment rights, you usually are pointing to something that the government is taking away from you rather than, a private entity. And so while, certainly the petitioners are sympathetic, we're sympathetic to the situation, what they've been experiencing. It seemed, I was very surprised by sort of what the court was pointing to as far as their, the reason why this was inappropriate. They certainly could have pointed to, as Andre mentioned, sort of the fact that all of the arbiters are part of the, this system that is, been intimidating and harassing him. But that's not what they pointed to. And so, frankly, I will not be surprised if the contract is held. There's not, religious bodies are not exempt from, contractual obligations. And so again, just surprised by the direction the court went in its ruling.
Well, it was very surprising. And Dr. Brown, there are a lot of people who think that once this gets to the next level, it could be reversed. But if it ends up being reversed, what's the statement that it's telling us as it relates to religion and possibility of contractual obligations?
Well, I'd like to start by saying anytime you're going to join a church and you have to sign an arbitration agreement before becoming a member, you might want to rethink that decision. I've been a pastor for a long time. Trust me when I tell you, God has to be in charge of what's going on. And so that should have been the first red flag there. But quite honestly, I think Melissa's point shouldn't be overlooked. Contract law and the binding nature of a contract are things that don't just magically go away when you walk through the church door, whatever that church may be. And so I think that's going to be an issue that could very well carry. But as you say, when you step back and look at the wider context of this whole thing, I don't know, it makes you scratch your head a little bit and wonder and worry where this might go.
Bettina, I got to ask you this question. I mean, we start talking about issues as it relates to churches and signing agreements and things of that nature. But what was even more confusing to me is someone makes a determination that you have actually left a religion. When a court can tell me, maybe they'll say, you know what, Orland, you haven't been in church in a month, so as far as we're concerned, you probably have left that religion. I mean, does that start to beg any potential issues here that the court concluded that because they quote unquote left, they actually connected someplace else and they did a complete separation from a legal perspective? Am I missing something here?
You've put your finger on something that's that's so perplexing about this case, because the Church of Scientology has now asked the Supreme Court to weigh in on this case, and we'll find out maybe within the next few weeks whether the Supreme Court is going to take up that issue. But if they do, they're going to have to do what you said, Orland. They're going to have to tiptoe through this minefield of, how does a court assess the religious components of a contract without becoming excessively entangled in religious questions, which, is, of course, a breach of the Establishment Clause. And then, of course, you have all your free exercise rights as well that they're trying to balance. The Church of Scientology is making the argument here that any court interference in this arbitration process is an infringement on their free exercise rights to operate free of government or court control.
Right.
So, it's a minefield, and they have to somehow negotiate a way through in a way that upholds justice in this particular instance, but which also doesn't invalidate the whole very long history of religious arbitration, which exists within our legal system, as Melissa pointed out, in the Jewish system, in the Roman Catholic system, in other religious forums. So, it's going to be a very interesting case.
You know, Andre, something that's interesting, we have many of our justices that actually connect themselves to specific religions. I believe maybe 6 of our justices at the Supreme Court level claim to be Catholics. And so when we're starting to see that part of your identification is also your religious convictions to some degree, how do you think that plays into them starting to deal with a case with Scientology? What's your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, so so we hear that in every judicial confirmation hearing. Every nominee goes before the Senate Judiciary Committee and says, "I will not be colored and biased by my my religious background and such." But when it comes to arbitration agreements in a church, what about a church, mosque, synagogue that has part of its membership application, an agreement that says that any and all disputes will be adjudicated by a council of pastors or rabbis or imams, and then their judgment is final and binding. If that member then leaves the church, then under Bixler, a court. A court would say, well, no, that's you have a First Amendment situation there. But prior to Bixler, if a court determined that the arbitration process was neutral and that the disputes fell within the scope of the agreement, then they probably would have compelled arbitration. It's interesting to read that opinion, the rationale and analysis that the court reached. This will be an interesting tug of war between the religious clauses and also contract law enforcement.
I'm gonna have to let that be the last word on this, but this is an interesting topic. And when we start seeing an intertwining of contracts and religion and having judges telling us who's members and who's not, I think the fun is just beginning. All right, well, let's round this up. Bettina, tell me something I don't know.
Okay, so we were talking earlier about the US Commission on International Religious Freedom and asking, was this an effective body? Well, did you know that the Chinese Communist Party regularly personally sanctions the members of the commission because they are so uncomfortable with the spotlight that USCIRF continually places on the religious freedom violations of China?
Wow, Dr. Brown, tell me something I don't know.
Efforts to, quote unquote, make America great again are largely wasted because they're attempting to do so by excluding the very people and the very principles that made this country great in the first place. Hopefully they get that memo one day, but I'm not holding my breath.
Melissa, tell me something I don't know.
Yeah, so Orlin, we talked about the makeup of the current Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, and I mentioned in a previous episode that this court has ruled in favor of religious organizations more frequently than any court previously, any makeup. But I wanted to add the additional fact that in most of these cases, the winning religion has been a mainstream Christian organization, whereas in previous courts, pro-religion outcomes more frequently favored minority or marginal religious organizations.
Wow. Andre, tell me something I don't know.
Republicans will not take over Congress after the 2022 midterm elections because Democrats will be energized and empowered by the Dobbs decision.
Well, listen, thank you very much. We appreciate your conversation today. And I want to thank our audience for being here with us and hope you enjoyed our conversation. Just want you to remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.